The World Trade Center, tower number 1, is on fire. The whole outside of the building was just a huge explosion.
Dispatch to all units. We have reports of an explosion at the North Tower of the World Trade Center.
Thank you very much. We want to welcome you to the Rotary Club of Orange Park Sunrise's inaugural Flags for Heroes celebration. Today we reflect on those who have lost their lives on September 11, 2001. Those innocent individuals that got up that morning to go to work, or catch a plane, or simply live their lives that day. And then there are those individuals that made a choice, not knowing that their decision to be a good Samaritan, or their commitment to duty, honor, and service would inevitably lead them to sacrificing their lives that day to protect and or help others.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Dear Heavenly Father, as we have assembled ourselves together this day to remember the attack on this great nation, we also are here to remember all those who have given their lives and loved ones in response to this terrible act against America. The first responders, the police, the military, the fire department, and EMS, may we never forget, and may we stand united against all those who are against us. We acknowledge, O God, that you are beyond all our thoughts about you, higher than all our words we speak concerning you, and greater than all our emotions about you. We stand at attention to acknowledge you and bow in humility to thank you. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I am a retired air traffic controller, and I'll try to set the stage for you. And this is kind of funny because they said emotion is secluded memory. On most mornings, I can't remember whether I took my vitamin or not, and that's by 9 o'clock. But on September 11th of 2001, I can describe in detail almost everything that happened that day. I'll try to set the stage for you. Jacksonville Center, like all the other centers in the United States, there's about 20 of them. They're all remotely located. And Jacksonville Center is actually located in Hilliard, Florida. Now, if there is anything remote, you thought Callahan was remote? Hilliard still has one red light. And I take that back. It used to be a flashing light. Now it actually is a red light. But with the 20 centers, they each own about 400,000 square miles of airspace. Jacksonville Center owns to the south Orlando, where it butts up against Miami Center's airspace. To the east, it's 150 miles out to the ocean, where we exchange airspace with New York Center. North, Wilmington, North Carolina, where we connect to Washington Center. And over to the west, Berkeley Field, Alabama, where we'll connect with Houston Center. So on this day, when I'm getting to work, remember, the center has 300 air traffic controllers and 200 support personnel. At any given time, there are probably 75 controllers at work and maybe another 10 or 15 on break. The reason I remember it so well is I was a senior supervisor at the time, which means that I would have Friday, Saturday off, and that's done strictly for money because you get a differential pay on Sunday for 25%, so you want to work on Sunday, but you want the weekends off. So Tuesday would have been the middle of my work week. Controllers work very weird schedules. 2 nights, swing, and then 2 days. We, for some reason, think that gives us a longer weekend. It really doesn't. You just sleep an extra day. But I got off work on Monday night at 9:30. We were short of supervisors, and I had to be back to work at 9 o'clock on Tuesday morning. We try to arrive to work at least 30 minutes early, but there was no way I'm going to make that turnaround. It takes me an hour to get home. I got to get some sleep in and go back. I'm trying to get at least 7 hours in. When I get back to the center, it's about 8:45 that morning. And when you go into the area, into the control room, there's a watch manager that's in charge. And the operations manager is only one that's on duty. You get your briefing from him, then you go down to your area. So this morning, I'm getting the briefing from the operations manager, and on the other side of our desk, the watch manager's desk, is technical operations. Those are the guys that are responsible for the building, the radar equipment, the frequencies. They've got the most money, so they actually have a television, and they have it tuned to CNN that morning. So as I'm getting the briefing, I'm standing here, the operations manager is at a desk, and it's just a little bit higher than where I am, and he's looking over my shoulder. He stops in the middle of the briefing, and I see that he's distracted, so naturally I turn around and look behind me at the television screen. The World Trade Center is on fire. There are no details at this point, and we're both staring and listening, trying to gather information. Did a small plane fly into that building? Did some controller lose an aircraft and got him into that building? Was this a news helicopter that got too close and went into that building? No one has any earthly idea at this point. Now, just remember the time lapse is about 12 to 15 minutes. As we're standing there watching, time's flying away, we watch an airliner fly into the second building. The briefing halts. I fly to the area because we've got a controller in charge, and remember, I'm a senior supervisor. They need me in the control room. I get down to the south area, and about this time, the controllers that were on break are rushing back to the control room. They're rushing back to tell the people, because remember, this room is remote. The controllers in that room have no earthly idea what's going on. But those that would come back on break start telling the story about aircraft flying into the World Trade Center. Controllers, as crude as they can be, they're pretty sharp people. Everybody that's not listening to frequency congestion is turning around saying, repeat that. What just happened? As they're clamoring to get this information out, the phones start ringing. There are only 6 phones in the room, and that they're all attached to supervisor's desk. I go over and I pick up the phone. It's the watch manager. Greg, tell every controller, get everything down. I said, what? He says, land everything. Nothing is to overfly an airport. Get them all down. I go to my controllers. Guys, all of your airborne inventory, get it on the ground now. Make them all land. These are pretty intelligent people. They don't like doing things without reason. There's a lot of why. This is 737. You want me to put him at the airport he just flew over? He can't land there. The airport's only 3,000 feet long. These are the questions that we're getting. Meanwhile, the aircraft that they can get down, they're getting them down, and they're talking to the pilots, and the pilots are asking the same question. I'm going to Miami. Why are you trying to make me land at Jacksonville? What's going on? No one has any information. Now remember, time is actually flying, but it seems like it might be moving slow, but the next phone call was almost 20 minutes later. From the watch manager, every phone ringing again. Anybody that is refusing to land, get their call sign. Any aircraft that does not answer the radio get their call sign. We're watching active scrambles. When the active scramble, that's the Air National Guard going up. Now I relay this information. Every controller in the room understands we're under attack. We don't know who's attacking us, but they're not launching fighters for reasons arbitrary. We don't know who the enemy is. We're gathering all of our information from CNN at this point in time. But the controllers always have a tremendous amount of banter going on. It was one of the first times I'd ever been in that control room where there was total silence. Controllers were standing looking over at the controller's shoulder, because if you got 15 airplanes, you can't focus on all 15 of them. Controllers were skipping their breaks, standing over the other controller's shoulder, watching aircraft, particularly any aircraft that was full of fuel, a large aircraft. It might be just a hair off course. We allow aircraft to get about 4 miles off course and we don't pay them any attention. On this day, if you weren't flying centerline airway and you got off your path just a little bit, you were suspect. Now, we'll fast forward to after we get all of those airplanes on the ground. It takes about 2 hours to complete the airborne inventory. At this point, I've seen something that I've never seen before in air traffic. The middle of the day, total radio silence. No one to talk to. Controllers are not even talking. And I look over to one of the controllers that's going on the break. And I never forget it. I said, "Harold, are you okay?" He turned back and looked at me, and there were tears in his eyes. Harold was responsible for the safe and expeditious movement of aircraft. He never thought that he would have to consider those same aircraft as hostile and report them to a defense network to be taken down. But this is where we were on 9/11. We didn't know who was friend or foe at this point in time. As we proceeded forward, there would be no aircraft for about 3 days. The only thing flying would be military aircraft. But to go back to the events, whenever presidential aircraft is airborne, it takes the designation of one. Air Force One, Marine One, Army One. And the only way you can take that designation is you have to have the president on board. Well, we know that President Bush is at a school somewhere in Florida. One of the controllers calls me and says, "Greg, supervisors have to monitor the movement of presidential aircraft." Me being the supervisor in the South area, the controller says, "Greg, I'm taking a handoff on Air Force One." I grab my headset. I head over to the sector to plug in to monitor the movement of Air Force One. As I'm going over, I hear the supervisor over in the central area being beckoned, and the guy says, "Hey, I've got Air Force One movement." We both stop and look at each other. It's impossible for him to have Air Force One movement and for me to have it because my airspace doesn't butt up against his. I have Air Force One. He has Marine One. Across the nation in those 20 centers, all supervisors were getting calls like that. There were Air Force One and Marine Ones taking off everywhere. Some with escorts, some without escorts. It's then we realize the president has a lot of decoys. We didn't know where he was, which is kind of scary because you're plugging in and you're protecting, but you don't know what you're protecting, if it's real or not. And that lasted literally for hours. So with that being said, the president was going to be safe if nobody else was. I don't even think he ever got on the airplane. All right. The ensuing days would be no better. When we did go back to what we call normal, remember that day we put 4,000 aircraft on the ground in 2 hours. When we got ready going back to what we call normal, it never went back to normal. People were afraid to fly in airplanes, and reasonably so. For the next 3 years, we would go to work and literally be absolutely bored, which drives an air traffic controller crazy. The last thing you need is somebody with high intelligence with nothing to do. But I can tell you that the men and women that served in that room that day all had one thing in common. They were hell-bent on protecting you no matter what it took. The lives on the ground were just as important as the ones in the air. And I doubt seriously any air traffic controller would want to have to get on the defense network and report an aircraft. But I can assure you, every controller in that room was ready to do it. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm absolutely humbled to be here today to honor our heroes on this solemn day in our history. I've got no doubt that there are thousands of stories out there. We got to hear Greg's this morning as well, and that was awesome, Greg. Thank you. But quite frankly, many of our young people today, they're only aware of this event through history books. And this is my story of that horrific day 23 years ago this morning. At the time, I was a Navy commander, and I was the aviation officer community manager, and I was stationed at the Navy Annex, which was about a half mile up the hill from the Pentagon in Arlington. I got to tell you, I woke up a bit nervous that morning because I was due to go brief the Assistant Secretary of the Navy down at the Pentagon on the pilot and bonus program. And this was a critical program for the retention of aviators that were, quite frankly, leaving the Navy in droves in order to fly for the airlines. And my first task that morning was to drop off my assistant at Reagan National Airport before I was going to head back to the office, practice my brief, before I was going to head down to the Pentagon. So I'm driving back to the office, and I heard on the radio about a plane crashing into the World Trade Center. Probably a lot like Greg, I thought it was a mistake, so I didn't give it a whole lot of thought. So I arrived back in my office. I'm going through my brief when we got word of a second aircraft that had hit the World Trade Center. So at this point now, my senses are on alert. In fact, I called my wife, Chris, who's here today, or she called me rather, told me, hey, be careful. There's news reported that possible coordinated attacks. So shortly thereafter, at 0937 and 46 seconds, an airliner flew approximately 100 feet over our building en route to the Pentagon. It was so loud that I thought it was a rocket overhead, and a split second later, I heard the explosion. And I actually thought that it hit our building till I look out the window and I see the smoke and flames rising from the Pentagon. So a bunch of us ran down to the Pentagon to see what we could do to help. And I noticed on the walk down that plane flew so low that it took light poles out on its way in. As we approached the building, we were told to stay back because there was rumors of another airliner that was inbound, which obviously turned out to be Flight 93 that went down in Shanksville, whose intended target was the nation's capital. Hundreds of people were evacuating the Pentagon, and so we spent the next couple of hours helping evacuees up on the freeway off-ramp, which was eerily devoid of any traffic. It was amazing. You couldn't see any vehicle out there with the exception of first responders. After that, we headed back to the Navy Annex in order to see what we could do to help there. First thing I did when I got back to our building, I tried to get a hold of Chris, let her know I was okay, since she obviously knew I was heading down to the Pentagon. But all cell lines, everything was jammed at the time. I finally managed to actually get a hold of my parents in Illinois, of all places. And I told them, hey, quickly, can you get a hold of Chris, let her know I'm okay? Because the chief of naval personnel, who was a 3-star admiral, he was looking to stand up a command post in case we needed to evacuate casualties from the Pentagon. Additionally, our directorate was responsible for casualty notifications to families that had lost loved ones at the Pentagon. So at that point, we began the heartbreaking process of assigning casualty officers. And that was going to take days, as the process of identifying those killed would take some time. Quite frankly, I remember like it was yesterday, and I'm standing on the top of the hill at the Navy Annex there, the sun's setting, and I'm seeing flames and smoke rising from the Pentagon. And as our office worked through the night, it really wasn't until about 4 in the morning the next day when I finally got home. I had no idea of the destruction that had ensued until I turned on the TV and saw the first images of the plane slamming into the World Trade Center. And I was absolutely stunned. 184 people perished at the Pentagon that morning, and over 3,000 more at the World Trade Center in Shanksville. And the world, as we knew it, changed. The ensuing days, Greg pointed out, were pretty much a blur. But I can remember vividly going for a run a couple of days later behind our house in Fairfax Station around a lake. And I noticed there were a number of military staff cars at one particular home, and I said a silent prayer, as I could only surmise that this was a family of a loved one that had been killed at the Pentagon. So we spent the next couple of weeks with grieving and shocked families, helping in any way that we could, as a center was set up at one of the local hotels in Arlington. Additionally, there was a memorial service being planned for the families at the Pentagon, at which President Bush would preside. And as a result, the Navy was looking for volunteers to assist local families with all of the details that they needed, as well as to take care of families that would be flying in from around the country for the ceremony. And I volunteered to help one of those families. My assignment happened to be to assist the family of Navy Commander Patrick Dunn, who was killed in the Pentagon that morning. His wife, Stephanie, was pregnant with their first child at the time. And what is highly improbable, I could have been assigned to any family in the greater Washington, D.C. area, Virginia, or Maryland, yet this family lived less than 1 mile from our house. Remember that story about the house by the lake where I said a prayer? That was the family. Surely that was no coincidence. So I spent the next week doing whatever I could to assist her, as well as various family members who were flying in for the memorial service. I couldn't imagine the grief that they were all going through together. And I still remember like it was yesterday, knocking on her door the first time to introduce myself. As a military member, you always know there's a risk of being injured or killed. But it was truly unimaginable that something like this could happen on U.S. soil. The memorial service, as I said, was presided over by President Bush, and it was attended by thousands, to include former President Clinton. Mrs. Dunn subsequently hosted a celebration of life at a sports bar in Old Town Alexandria, where they had their first date that was a favorite of theirs, where tears and laughs were shared throughout this very difficult time. What I can't believe is that child they were expecting, a daughter, is now 22 years old. How the world has changed at that time. Eventually, we had to get back to doing our normal jobs, and Greg pointed out if there were such a thing following that day. And you may recall that I said we were losing so many pilots to the airlines that our retention rates were terrible. That literally changed overnight as the patriotic fervor led many of them to pull their resignation paperwork. Additionally, my phone was ringing off the hook from aviators that had already resigned, looking to get back in the Navy and back in the fight. And I kept a list of all those people, and we eventually brought many of them back. And as President Bush said at the time, these acts shattered steel, but they cannot dent the steel of American resolve. So that's my story. I apologize if some of my facts are off a bit, as time has a tendency to do that. But what I do know is that over 3,000 people gave their lives that day, and many more would follow as we track down those responsible for these horrific acts. I also want to particularly thank all of the first responders and the medical personnel in New York, Washington, and Pennsylvania that answered the call that day. 343 who gave their lives. And to all those throughout our great nation that continue to do so today and every day, including right here in Clay County, let us never forget. I thank the Orange Park Sunrise Rotary for honoring our heroes and to not allow this day to fall into the shadows of history. As President Obama once said, even the smallest acts of service, the simplest acts of kindness, is a way to honor those we lost, a way to reclaim the spirit of unity that followed 9/11. May God bless all those that perished that day, our men and women in uniform who continue to keep our country safe, and our first responders and medical personnel who dedicate and risk their lives daily to helping and healing in times of crisis. Thank you.